So I'll invite Sonia back, and I'm going to switch the poll too. And we're going to kind of have now a discussion about some of her expertise. And she has a wide-ranging career in this, so we're going to get a lot of useful information. And feel free to pop a question too in the Q&A if you have a specific question about the topic we're talking about, and I'll get some of those in. I'm going to switch the poll here too quick. Thank you so much for answering the polls. It really helps guide this discussion, because every webinar is unique. I'm going to try to get you guys the information that you really care about. So welcome back. So let's start kind of with some of this legal stuff to get that out of the way. And I know you have a lot of experience with that. So I want to kind of help people understand the risk and legal ramifications. So what kind of risk does your typical organization face, if they kind of just ignore accessibility?
Yeah, so what I've seen is that a lot of companies are now receiving demand letters from law firms. So what a demand letter is, it's a letter from a law firm saying that your site is not compliant and you need to pay a fee. And that's anywhere from, I don't know, $1,000 to $20,000, right? And then they have requirements in that that demand letter to put up to compliance and things like that. So, and then also last year, probably there was an average about 150 lawsuits. So actually went to the courts with pertaining to website compliance. So there is, there's a usability factor to accessibility, of course. And then there's a legal side where you have people going in also who are just clicking on websites, checking them just so they can get the lawyer fee or whatever fee they get for auditing. So you have people going around doing that. And a lot of people are, I think, misinformed. They think that, it's just for government websites, but it's not true because you have case law. They're constantly rewriting requirements and things like that. So if you were taken to the courts and they said it was not accessible and your website is not accessible, you would lose. So, there's no law specifically stating that you have to be WCAG 2.1 AA compliant right now, but it is case law. So you do have a liability if your site is not compliant.
Great. So let's just say you're in an organization and you do get a demand letter. What do you what does you recommend kind of the first steps then?
The first steps I would do is first contact your, in-house or your lawyer so they can review it. And then the second step is actually getting an audit on the defects that they're pointing out in the demand letter. So some demand letters, the ones that just check sites just in general, it's kind of a blanket, we can't do, there's no alt tags. And then some of them are very specific, meaning, they have it detailed with the code and what they found. So I would recommend contacting your lawyer and then also doing an audit and making sure that the defects are correct. Because like I said, sometimes they just send out a blanket demand letter.
Sure. Kind of like a bot. They're just trying to scrape the internet for opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, would you say that it's a good idea to not just look for whatever they call out in a letter, but to kind of look for anything else, in case they miss something?
Yeah, I would do the entire, like when you receive a demand letter, unless they state like maybe the checkout page or a specific page, I would just for now check that entire page. You would need an automated check, which only picks up 50% of the checkpoints. And then you would need to consult with somebody to do a manual audit as well.
Okay.
Normally, if you consult somebody to do the manual, they'll do the automated as well. But after that, if they do find defects, I would turn around and say, okay, do my entire website because I know I'm going to have to fix everything.
Okay. So what would you recommend an organization do? What's kind of the best thing to do to just limit, be proactive and limit your legal exposure around these issues?
Yeah, of course, creating an accessible website is number one, but a lot of people, that's an afterthought or they had no idea about it. So, I mean, the first thing would to be is add, accessibility statement if you are truly actively, making your website compliant. So you, in the accessibility statement, you could break down, okay, by the end of 2021, all my components will be accessible, because with large sites, sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years to be
Right.
compliant if you're either redesigning or fixing issues. Just depends on the complexity of your site. So that's the first step, is just building like a roadmap and within your accessibility statement. Um, yeah, I think I
That's
answered the
great
question.
advice.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. We got some questions coming in too, some good ones. Here's one kind of related to this. Someone asks if I'm linking to content to be fully compliant, is it just what I'm directly linking to, or does the entire website I'm linking to, or the entire whatever I'm linking to, have to be compliant?
This is in reference to like a third party
Yep. So
website.
say you're linking out, say you are linking to a PDF on someone's
Mhm.
website. That PDF is accessible, but the rest of their website is not. Or you're
Yeah,
linking
so
to a page on their website, and that's okay. You've checked that, but the rest of the website's not.
correct. Whatever you're linking to, you're somewhat responsible. There is back and forth with that because it's on a third party website. For example, I know a lot of people have like a different payment modal where it goes to a different website.
Yeah.
People can't pay for things, purchase things. But yeah, so if that link, whatever you're linking to, is compliant, your risk is limited, but you're not responsible for their website.
Okay. That's great. Thanks. Um, a couple more questions. We'll do a couple more now. Someone said, this is more technical. They said if they have a site with a ton of JavaScript on
Mhm.
it for applications of special forms, would ARIA be necessary? It may. Every form is different. Every interactivity is different. ARIA definitely provides a better level of interactivity,
Mhm.
compatibility, and some of these hardware and software things have special things in it for that. So it is probably your best bet, but of course, everything is different. Any comments on that one?
From auditing tons of sites, I know that the JavaScript sites, they tend to have the most issues,
Yeah,
relying on scripts and things like that. And also, a lot of people don't know is that if you're using assistive technology, for example, like a screen reader, some people disable JavaScript so they can't even load it because it interacts with their screen reader, makes it act crazy. So yeah, so I wouldn't advise the JavaScript, but I know a lot of these sites are based off of JavaScript.
yeah, we see that too, unfortunately, and especially some simple web builder systems or any
Hmm.
of these simple systems that kind of help you put a site together without a lot of coding will rely on a ton of scripting and JavaScript and stuff that just isn't going to work well. Another great question, actually, this one is great. If I'm just starting the process to make sure the website's accessible, once we have our statement done, accessibility statement, what would you say would be the first 2 to 3 things to focus on? Like, for instance, alt tags or navigation or
Hmm.
whatever. You can answer this too. I would just say my just general thing as well. Start with structure. I
Okay.
just kind of have a ground up approach. Well,
Hmm.
if the navigation doesn't even work in a screen reader, then that kind of
Exactly.
sinks the whole website. But what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so it's kind of both parts. So the critical issues, of course, you would address first. And critical issues are typically issues that people can't access items. For example, if your e-commerce site and they can't add items to their cart, if they can't check out, if there's a roadblock, that's a critical issue. For example, alt text, it's a roadblock, but it's not really, unless it's like a graph containing important information. So just it's very subjective. But it's always best to start on your home page to tackle that because your homepage is essentially your template for your entire website most of the time. So once you fix those issues, you can implement it on the rest of the pages. And also that's the access to your website. So a lot of people who are going around trying to sue people, you can just, if they go on your home website and it's compliant, you're going to deter them. So
Yeah.
those are my recommendations.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up about the homepage. That's very true. And also keep in mind, hopefully your site is built with kind of content management tool where say there's a problem in the footer or the header or sidebar. Once you fix it, it's fixed everywhere. Um, that's a good point. And you'll see a lot of times if you have your site scanned, you'll like, oh, there's like 3,000 of whatever issues, but it's kind of the same one repeated. So hopefully it's not a bad picture as you think. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the design and branding aspect of things. So, what have you seen that from design perspective, what do most of the people out there struggle with most for their site?
Yeah, design is the worst. Working with designers, it's extremely difficult because they do not want to change their branding colors or their style. They have their style and for their company, and they don't want to change that. So the most difficult thing I think is the branding colors. Most of the time branding colors are not compliant, and they have it throughout the website, and it needs to have a correct color contrast ratio, like what Nick was saying earlier. So they would have to either change. I mean, you can keep your branding colors, but as long as you're not using them for like headers or throughout as for text and things like that. So that's the biggest thing. And also, sometimes the layout is an issue. Yeah, so the majority of the time is just the color for design.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that too. Yeah, what we have to do many times is like kind of add a secondary palette for
Mm.
clients that are colors that are going to work well with their brand maybe, but are of a higher contrast. That's kind of what we typically recommend. So what would you say is something, a strategy or approach someone could try to do to kind of balance that interesting design with accessibility?
Um, Yeah, the first thing would be to review all your colors and make sure that they're accessible on a dark background and a light background, and then have a library. A lot of people have different developers, or a new development team takes over, and all of these items are not accessible to them. So you're kind of recreating the wheel. Especially if you have a lot of people on your website that's constantly adding pages, say blogs, updating sales content, things like that. You want to have a library of all accessible, you know, content, colors, anything that they would use to build that web page.
Sure, yeah. I've seen the trend increase a little bit where we'll get a brand guide from a client and they'll have something in there about accessibility. So that's good. That's definitely a trend we're seeing. But yeah, design is always tricky. So let's talk a little bit about kind of some of the navigation and layout issues. What would you say in your mind is kind of the most important thing to get right when it comes to sort of website navigation?
Um, the most important thing is to ensure that everything, all active components, links, buttons, forms, everything is accessible by using the keyboard. And once that's done, you're pretty much covered by the screen reader as well. So I think that is priority one as far as navigation. So if you're using your tab key, you
Sure.
can get to all of the
Yep.
elements.
Yeah, keyboard usable,
Hmm.
which is sort of an easy thing to test. You can test that just with your own keyboard. And I know a lot of the gesture based systems, say on like we have these gestures on mobile devices, they're still keying off sort of key
Hmm.
type things, keyboard entry. I've seen a lot of issues with search too. That seems to be still one that even on a pretty accessible site, for some reason the search just doesn't work well.
Yeah.
Especially now we're seeing really interactive searches with where it finishes your
Yeah.
sentence or it
Hmm.
has suggestions. That can be really tricky. So how do you approach when you have a highly interactive site? How do you kind of approach that auditing process? What kind of you look for issue? Where do you look for issues?
Um, like interactive sites, typically, I use the first thing I would do is tab through the entire site. Because then if it doesn't tab through, you're just wasting your time. You might as well do the manual audit after that. And then the screen reader, using a screen reader to navigate the site as well. That's helpful before you dive into the code, so you know, because sometimes the code's kind of buried like within tags and things like that. So it's good to make sure that it is accessible, and so you have your recommendations as well.
Great. We got some more questions coming in too. So here's a good one. I'm interested in what you think about this. Someone's asking, do you have an opinion on sort of how you lay out text? Where you put text with the other objects on the page, whether it's aligned to a certain way or centered, or, if you have sidebars. Basically, they're getting at, how do you make it as easy as possible for people to zoom in on text?
Yeah. So the best practice is always to have it aligned left. And that's for, so people struggling with dyslexia, any type of cognitive disorder, it's easier for them to access it if it's all on the left side. And then as far as layout, I would avoid column text, make sure that images are in line with text. Content, just make sure that you're not using, for example, color. If you have a content that says, I don't know, something that stands out with color, just make sure you have like an underline with it. But yeah, those are my recommendations.
Those are great points. And I'm glad you brought up cognitive too, because we've talked some things about vision and other stuff in screen readers, but that is another thing too, kind of covered under accessibility, is differences in cognitive function. So yeah, it's very important to think about that as well. So there are some people who will choose for text to have some type of control or button built in that may enhance the text as part of the site, in case someone's device or software doesn't do that automatically. Sometimes that can work good, but that then becomes an interactive component. You do have to make sure how that functions is also accessible and compatible.
Exactly.
So that's definitely...
if it's based off of JavaScript, it won't be available. So
that's another thing, yes. And many times, sort of the whiz-bang tools they sell, oh, it's simple, 1, 2, 3, click, fix your site, and you throw it on your site. It's a huge JavaScript thing. Even outside of accessibility, it can cause other issues like conflicts with other script, slows your site down a lot, and then it can really break the design. And you might be getting a little benefit, but really it's no substitute for just building an accessible site, in the first place.
And then when I've experienced when I'm auditing websites and they do have the accessibility widget on there, I have to disable it because it kind of like you said, it breaks the layout and things like that, and I can't audit it correctly because it's trying to override a lot of things. And also like you said, it breaks sites because of updates and things like that. So it's not very reliable.
Yeah, kind of on this topic too, we did get a question specifically about WordPress, and WordPress is a great platform for accessibility to build your website on. It's a really good one. And out of the box, there actually are some accessibility issues. Not like every content management system is perfect. I don't know of one yet. Hopefully there will be. Hopefully there'll be an out of the box accessible system. That would be great, right? But at least with WordPress, with your theme, if you develop a theme, it can be highly, highly accessible, and it can work very well because it's all dependent sort of on your theme. And someone asked, this question was about WordPress and about plugins, and there are some plugins, and they will help. I find for WordPress plugins, the best ones are basically just ones that are going to fix the out-of-the-box accessibility issues. They do it really well. It's very lightweight, does not slow your site down. It's not going to do a bunch of crazy stuff, but it will go through and just fix all known simple accessibility issues that kind of come with it. And then from there, you at least know when you start and build your design and your theme, if you build an accessible one, you're going to be kind of covered, So that's what I would kind of say about WordPress. Let's talk some about forms, because forms are just so important, whether it's a donation form, checkout form, contact form, volunteer form, whatever it is. So what's kind of the most common problem you usually see with forms?
Not having the correct label, and people mistake the placeholder text that's inside the form field as a label. And once you start typing, it goes away. So your form really doesn't have a visual label. So form fields have to have a visual label. And also if it's required or not, that's, there's a lot of issues with that. They don't put the required visible label on there, or program it so it's required either or. They always mismatch those. And what else? I think those are the top two, just the labels and the required field. And also the format, if you're requiring the end user to input a certain format, you have to let them know ahead of time, which is 9 times out of 10 in the label or below the form field, and let them know what label they need to use.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I see a lot. And it seems to be this weird design trend too. It seems like like a design trend now is the forms are almost less and less
Yeah.
accessible. Like instead of the labels, you a lot of times, yeah, you'll see the text in the field and it'll be so light gray, like you almost can't even read it
Mhm.
if you have good vision. It's very strange. Forms, like I said, are usually pretty critical to your site. So definitely test forms really well. And I know you're working on a big Salesforce, or you're working on a big thing right now where they rely on some Salesforce forms too, and there's some issues with that, isn't there?
Yeah. So essentially, nothing is compliant. All of the developers, they have to add on like ARIA labels, and then some of the components you can't even do that. So they have to redevelop the component. So there's a lot of struggles with the Salesforce components. And they do have a list on the Salesforce website of what components have accessibility issues, which is helpful, but it's not helpful if your site has to be compliant. Um, so there are some workarounds for some components, but other components, they don't have any plan on making them accessible until like later this year, whenever they're required to. So it's horrible to rely on
Yeah.
components from other companies.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. And we mentioned that a little bit earlier. Yeah, you got to think about the third party things. So let's say you use HubSpot, Salesforce, or Constant Contact, or Survey Monkey, or whatever. If you're kind of embedding things in your site, and it's unfortunate because a lot of those tools are really important. They do a lot of good stuff. I have had a couple clients kind of exercise the nuclear option when it comes to those, which is like, let's say you have a tool like Constant Contact or Salesforce, and you really need to push your data into it. They may make their own form entirely outside of the system, have a
Mhm.
programmer make it, and make a 100% accessible form, and then basically submit that data into the system with the API and other functions, right? Other programming means, so that they don't have to rely on the forms that come with it. But that it's unfortunate, but sometimes that might be the only the only solution. Um, keep let's see. I got one more poll. I'm gonna switch the poll again quick and keep the questions coming. We've got some more time here. Let's get into a little bit about content. Because the thing is, let's say you go through all these things and you kind of fix the navigation or fix the other issues, right? That stuff may not change a lot, but
Mhm.
typically on your websites you're adding content, new content all the time. The
Yes.
content changes a lot if it's a blog or news or updating something. So what do you kind of recommend organizations do to approach content to make sure they keep their accessibility up?
Just having either templates. I know a lot of company build, like, let's say they have a Word template, so they can formulate the content correctly, have heading levels for sections that is broken down, making sure that they're using a list format for items rather than just putting commas in a huge paragraph. Um, yeah, just having a checklist to make sure you're hitting all the items. Another big one that I always see is link text. Yes, we can, you see the see more or view more just more, it's more work on the back end. If you have link text that's all the same, they'd have to add in additional ARIA labels for that. So it's always best to add unique labels to your link text. If it's taking you external or internal, let's say it's a statement, make sure that the statement has a date on it, not just statement PDF. So that's a big one as well.
Yeah, those are great tips. And so when it comes to kind of rich media too, we mentioned YouTube, but there's a lot, media and photos and video and even music and all kinds of media now is really important for a lot of people's sites. What are kind of some common issues you see with multimedia heavy sites?
Well, let me see there. A lot of no closed caption. And so I know you pointed that out. And also some people, they do rely on the YouTube closed caption, but they don't audit it like you stated before. So that could be a non-compliance issue. And also you're required, it depends on what guideline you're required to adhere to, Section 508 or, WCAG 2.1. With videos, you have to have a transcription as well. So people who can't see, and let's say I've seen some videos with just text streaming across with just music in the background, they wouldn't know what's going on. So they have to have a transcription available with the video. A lot of people do not put the title, descriptive title within the YouTube iframe. So they don't even know what they're going, like the next element is. So that's a big issue as well.
Yeah, those are great points. The transcript thing, I see that too. And especially a lot of nonprofits, you're gonna leverage video to do things. Maybe it's an ask video or an impact video that shows your impact. All these things, and it tends to be that these want to be sort of moving videos, and you want to really kind of give an idea to the viewer of your mission, different things, and so that the transcript can be important because then you can describe the music, you can describe what's happening in more detail, you can kind of paint a picture with the text more. Keep that in mind if you want to make your video be really effective and accessible. That's important. Closed captioning is great, but if it's just the words that the people are saying, it's not really the whole picture. So that do we have any more questions? I have a wrap up of just some tools I'll show, but while we have Asanya here, if there are any other questions people want to pose or anything else that you're curious about that we didn't discuss, we kind of covered a range of things, but we can wait a couple more minutes for questions, and then we'll start going into just some free resources you guys can use. So, and it looks like the last poll. That was the last poll. So it looks like 75% of you said you don't currently have any kind of accessibility tool. So that's good. We'll talk about tools then. Let's see. It looks like we don't have any more questions. So we'll move on now and talk a little bit about, never mind. We do have one. That's great. Keep the questions coming. So aside from WCAG guidelines, are there any books or anything should be reading or recommending? Is there anything that you know of? I'm going to point to a couple websites, but what are some of your go-to resources for information?
My go-to is the WebAIM. You pull that up. That's a great resource. But I live on the WCAG page. Just Google searching WCAG, and then whatever your issue is, it will be probably the first result. As far as reading, I read Medium a lot. There's a lot of good accessibility articles on there. And then LinkedIn, a lot of people within the accessibility communities, they post articles and things like that. So I'm constantly reading to keep up with guidelines because they're forever changing. They already have a draft for the next version of WCAG. And if it's Section 508, I think they're kind of stuck on the 2.0 because it's mandated in the law. But if you're not in the government sector, you will have to, keep up with the versions. So yeah, but just like I said, blogs and articles. As far as books, I don't think there are too many books. I think I know 2 books that are really good, but I can't remember the title.
Yeah, I'm not really that familiar. Those are good points. Like it's changing so fast. I'm not
Mhm.
sure. Like a book in print that could be outdated in like 2 months.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
yeah, it is kind of an online thing. Like I know
Mhm.
for me, most of my resources, it's online. Um, so well, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome.
You're
Um,
welcome.
and I really appreciate it. This was all really good information.